Our topic is as follows. This year, as you know, is a leap year. And we have two Adars. Just very briefly, what's the reason for this extra month? The reason is that the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. It literally follows the cycle of the moon each month. Now, 12 lunar months add up to 355 days, which is 11 days shy of the solar calendar, which means we're falling 11 days behind the seasons. And the Torah says, for example, that Pesach has to be in the spring. So the calendar has to be adjusted. Well, let me give you this, because we're going to look at this in a minute. You have it on the paper. So the calendar has to be adjusted. So every 2 or 3 years, a month, 30 days is added. Now, which month is added? The month of Adar is added, because the last month of the year. Nisan is the first month of the year. Rosh Hashanah is the 7th month. This is the first month of the year, and Adar is the last month. Now, the question is Purim. It's a whole question, which one is the added month and which is the actual Adar? It's an interesting discussion. There's different opinions. Birthdays at the first Adar, the second Adar, a Yortzeit. The laws are fairly, I won't say complex, but many. But the Gemara says like this, that really we would have had Purim in the first Adar for the simple reason that why wait? It's the first opportunity, Purim. But Purim is deferred to the second Adar, and one of the reasons to be closer to Pesach. That one redemption, Purim, should be followed with another redemption. The idea being it should gain traction and lead to the final redemption. Let's get the wheels of redemption in motion in close proximity. So Purim kind of is then shifted to the second Adar. What about the first Adar? So when it comes to the 14th of Adar, which normally Purim could have been, it's not. So we don't want to ignore it altogether. So what you're looking at is as follows. This page, there's two of them. I don't know if you can see this, but okay. At the top, Hilchas Megillah, that's clear. There's 2 pages, and the one which is for Hilchas Megillah. So Hilchas Megillah, the laws of the Megillah, friends, this is the end of the first section of Oirach Chaim. Let me explain. The Code of Jewish, very briefly, some history. The Code of Jewish Law, Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch means a set table. Who wrote this? Rabbi Yosef Cairo, who lived in the 15th century, late 1400s and in the beginning of the 15th century. So there were great scholars who already began to write down the halachas as separate volumes. It's virtually impossible to learn Gemara, even for a great scholar, and at the end of the day, know what to do. So many opinions, and the Gemara digresses. It's virtually impossible. So the Rambam wrote a great code of Jewish law, and so did many other scholars. Rambam wrote it 800 years ago, lived in the 12th century. He wrote a very general work, the Rambam, and it addresses all areas of Jewish law. But there was a need to write a work that's much more specific, much more detailed, and focuses on what we need to do now. So Rabbi Yosef Cairo wrote, based on a previous work called the Tur, he wrote a 4-volume called Set Table. What's a set table? The foods are prepared, all you got to come is eat. You don't have to go through the whole process of preparing the food, figuring out from the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the opinions what the law is. Here's the final law, take and eat. Set table, called the Shulchan Aruch. He divided into 4 sections, dealing with 4 areas of Jewish law. The first one's called the Oirach Chaim, path in life. And that is what we deal with every single day or in the course of the year that every Jew is obligated. It's davening. The laws of prayer and the laws of tefillin and the laws of Yom Tov and Shabbos and so on. So all that is dealt with in the Oirach Chaim. The last section deals with the calendar. So it starts with Rosh Chodesh, laws of Rosh Chodesh, and then Yom Tov, and then Rosh Hashanah, and then Pesach and Purim, because Purim is the end of the month, end of the year. So the final law is Purim Katan. After discussing laws of Purim, so what do you do in a leap year? So I've underlined, if you can see, but before we go, I got one more thing you have to know. So Rabbi Yosef Cairo was a Sfarad, lived in Cairo. So his rulings basically are based on the Rambam, who was also Sephardi from Spain, and the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Al-Farsi from Fez, North Africa, Morocco. But then there are some areas where the Ashkenaz codifiers, like the Rabbi Moshe from Germany, differ. So not long after the Shulchan Aruch was written, a gloss, an addendum was added in the text by Rabbi Moshe Issrelis. Rabbi Moshe, known as the Ramah, who lived in Krakow, Poland. He lived there only 50 years later. And he wrote his additions where either he added detail or he wrote where the Ashkenaz custom is different or the ruling is different. It all comes down to detail, but overall, of course, it's all the same tefillin, the same Shabbos, same kosher, but there's no one's details and custom. It's interesting. His commentary is called a mappa. A mappa means a tablecloth. So the Rabbi Yosef Kaya wrote the set table. Wait a second, there's the tablecloth, and then we put the food on. So he's adding the tablecloth. He gets the final word. What does he say? So if you look at the body of the text, here, this is the body of the text is in the center, is this. All of this is super commentaries and detail and on this case and that case by the commentaries. There's a whole hundreds of works written on this. Details of Jewish law, etc. So the Shulchan Aruch said like this. The Shulchan Aruch, the Rabbi Yosef Karo says that in Purim cotton, it's kind of a little bit as a festive character. In what sense? That we don't say tachanun. If there's a death, a burial, there are no eulogies, and we don't fast. Some say you do fast, and some say there are eulogies, but all agree you don't say tachanun. Then, in the fine print, it's a different font. This is the Rambam. Yesh oimrim. Some say, says the Rambam, shechayv laharba is b'mishta v'simcha. B'yud dalet sheba'adarish. Some say you should increase in a meal, a festive meal on the 14th of Adar, Rishon, which is Purim cotton, which is this coming Tuesday. Then he adds, it's not our custom. We don't sit down to a festive meal on Purim cotton. Mikol Mokim, last line, nonetheless, he counsels a person should, at his regular meal, add a little more, in order to fulfill the obligation of those who are strict and say you should have an actual meal, which means to wash and eat bread. That's what it means. Eat bread. When we don't do that, but in order to satisfy their opinion, at least enhance your ordinary meal. And then concludes, which I've underlined it, and he has like as a PS. It's a quote from the book of Mishlei, Proverbs. A good-hearted person, a good heart, Mishta Tomid is always celebrating. Actually, always literally drinking. Like, it's quite amazing. That's how he ends the end of the first volume of the daily life of a Jew. For Chassid, he should always be looking as an opportunity to fabrek. Now, he's telling the reader, it's always good to celebrate. I just told you that you should increase, make your meal a little bit more elaborate. And besides, it's a general principle, v'toiv leiv. So he ends the words with, v'toiv leiv mishta tamid. Okay. Now, the next page, I want you to look at the very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch. The very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, which the laws of awakening in the morning. Let's read it. Yeah, chapter 1. Din Ashkomas Haboike, the laws of awakening in the morning of Boy Tesifim. There are nine paragraphs. So the first words is the Shulchan Aruch, and then you can see again the different font, the Rambam. Moishe Issrelis says the Shulchan Aruch, he's gaber kari, a person should wake up in the morning like a lion. Not aggressive, ready to kill everybody. He means courageous. Lamid baboiker, with full of energy, to wake up in the morning, lavedosoi, lavedes boidoi, for the service of his Creator. A person should wake the dawn, not the dawn should wake him. Like David says, I wake in the dawn. That's how he starts. Now the Ramah begins. It says in the pasuk, this is a pasuk in Tehillim, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi tamid. I place God always before me. And he goes on to say, the person who wakes up, he should realize he's in the presence of God. And he goes on to say, this is a great principle of Torah, of life, always to be cognizant that we stand in the presence of Hashem. And he elaborates. Now, what I want to point out is, the Ramah, we're focusing in on Rabbi Moshe Issrelis, the Ramah's commentary. He starts with the pasuk, the verse, Shavis Hashem Nagdi Samid. I place God before me continuously. And his final commentary on this volume is Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. A good heart is continually celebrated. This word continuous, Tamid, appears in his opening words and his final words. This is significant. So the commentaries point out that what is he hinting to? He's hinting to also every day, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, there was 2 karbonos that were brought. That's called karban tamid. They were offered continuously every day of the year without exception. There was an offering, a korban that began the day service. No karbonos were brought before this was brought at dawn. And then there's the korban Tomash Abein Araboyim, which the korban was brought at evening time, which ended the service in the Beis Hamikdash, and that's why we daven Shachris and Mincha, basically. We daven Shachris and Mincha in place of these 2 karbonos. What about Ma'ariv? Ma'ariv originally was a custom. The sages never made that mandatory because at night there was no offerings that are brought. But why do we daven Ma'ariv? Because the altar was still in use. The offerings, the karbonos brought during the day, continue to burn on the altar at night. That's why we don't repeat the Amidah at night. We only repeat the Amidah. Why? Because someone doesn't know how to daven to discharge his obligation. He listens, the answer is Amen. Since there's no obligation to daven Ma'ariv, it's not repeated. So this is back to the discussion here. So the Ramah is starting with the first Tamid and the final Tamid. Let's examine these 2 continuous ones, the continuum. Basically, it's this. The first one is, I place God before me always. When I say this to you, if you take that seriously, what is the immediate response? The immediate response of an awareness, a true awareness, I'm in the presence of God, and he is examining me critically. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, Boichin Kloyos V'Leiv, he's examining our inners and our heart, our sincerity, our motive, not just our actions, but it's transparent. What's the reaction? Is awe. Is awe. That's the reaction to that awareness. Now, the end, what's he talking about? It's simcha. A good heart is always celebrating. His final words to the reader are, be besimchas. His first words are, you have to be in awe of God, realize before whom you stand. And the final instruction is simcha, which is in the context of Purim. Now, I want to explain that 2 things. So it comes out, 2 questions we're going to ask. Number 1, so Purim is the source of teaching us simcha. That's how the Ramah ends. A yid has to be always besimcha. My question is, but don't we derive simcha from Sukkot? Zman simcha seinu. Is that not the source of simcha? Why are we being told in the final statement as the closing words of the daily conduct of a Jew, simcha in the context of Purim? We should get that message in the context of Sukkot. Zman simcha seinu. Question 1. Question number 2, only at the end we're told about simcha. Isn't that something we should begin with? Are we commanded to serve God with joy? We have to find this out after going through the whole work, the whole code of Jewish law and all the laws of every day, Shabbos and Yom Tov and Tefillah. There should be also at the beginning. Answer both questions. Number 1, why Purim? Beautiful answer, which is in its own right. It's just its own teaching in its own right. Why do we need Purim? Because we're in exile. We're in exile and we face dark times. We face challenges that our ancestors did not experience in the Beis Hamikdash when the temple stood. Sukkot is a holiday mandated in the Beis Hamikdash, all the offerings, and Sukkot is observed then, it's commanded in the Torah. And in theory, had we never sinned, we would have stayed there, and there would never have been a Purim, never been. Have we not sinned, in theory? Right? No Haman, no Purim, no Hanukkah for that matter. We would just have the biblical holidays and the happily ever after. That didn't happen. We transgressed, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. This happens during this time of the second, in between, Purim's in between the first and second Beis Hamikdash, and they're in exile, and they're facing a Haman, the final solution. It's a dark time. So the Rebbe says, it's hard for us to draw the inspiration from Sukkot. It's a different world. First of all, it's a world. Even for us, Sukkot is a different world. Even for us, we're coming off Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We're basically not involved in the world for 7 days. But then when Tishrei is over, it's like the head. Tishrei is the head. And there's a disconnect between the head. If the head and if the body is healthy, then what happens in the head translates to the body. But exile is not a healthy state. We're spiritually unhealthy. So I'm saying even our Tishrei experience doesn't translate in the cold, dark world and challenges and the tests that we face. Purim. You have a big simcha that happens in Golos, in exile, the whole story with Esther, and the Jews had fallen so low, and it's all transformed. That's where we derive inspiration for our world. So we in the Golos world, we're not living in the Sukkot world, we're not living in the world of Yerushalayim, of being in the Beis Hamikdash. We're not in the head. We're down here in the body somewhere. Former generations were the head. That was their world. That was all they needed. It's the world they lived in. So we need what? We need to draw for us. The inspiration for Simcha is dafka where? Is in Purim. Because it comes in exile, it's in our world, and in the greatest darkness, and it's therefore the greatest Simcha. Now to go a little bit deeper. The question is, but wait a minute, you need Simcha all the time. Why are you fighting about this at the end only? By first asking another question, then we'll get to the very beautiful answer. We have to look at the commentaries on the Ramah, and they say like this. Why did the Ramah end with this verse altogether? He just said, there's an opinion that says you have to have a festive meal. It's not our custom, but one should, to satisfy that opinion, have a little more of a festive meal. Stop right there. Yeah, but he's a quote, and a good heart is always feasting. So they say because he's really saying you should make a big suda. So the question is, so say so. Well, why are you hinting it? Why are you hinting it? You come out and say that I'm minor Purim, celebrate. He's hinting by quoting a verse. So here comes the depth of our explanation. How much time we have? A few minutes, we'll try and convey it. First, background a little bit, and then we'll get to this 3 levels of simcha, which we'll define in a moment, but they correspond to 3 levels in general of observance, meaning there's things that Torah says to do outright, there's things that Chachamim, that are Rabbanan enacted, and then there's things that are minhagim, that are customs. On a superficial level, in terms of priority, obviously what's commanded in the Torah is priority number 1, rabbinic law is priority number 2, and a minhag is priority number 3, a custom. The Emes says on a deeper level it's the opposite. It's the opposite. Torah law is like this. The example of, I think I mentioned this, 3 servants. 3 kinds of servant. There's a servant, the master says, I want this and this, he does it. He does not more, not less, but follows to the T the instruction. Very good, can't fault him, beautiful. Tzaddik. But nothing more than that. But then there's a servant that the master hints. Doesn't say, I want a glass of water. He says, it's a hot day today. He goes and brings him a glass of water. And then there's a 3rd servant that the master doesn't have to hint. He just knows what the master wants because he's totally devoted. And he's tuned in and he knows. So too, the 3 levels of commandment. Hashem spells it out, is Torah law. Hashem hints to it, that's midrabanan. And where does a minhag come from? A Jewish minhag, where does it come from? Like Hakafas, dancing Simchas Torah, for example. It's not even a rabbinic law. It comes because we just know this is what Hashem wants. Now comes the question, maybe you're playing games with us. Say what you want, like we asked on the Rambam. This you say outright, this you only hint, and the 3rd one you're waiting for us to discover ourselves. We're happy to do anything we want. Shem's a don't be embarrassed, Eibishter. Tell us what you want. So the answer, friends, is like this. Hashem, we're made in the image of God. And the reason is that we should have a relationship with him. The Eibush has no image, but the Eibush to God, I mean, even spiritually. But God chooses to manifest himself through a whole system of spheres and levels and oil and keli in order to have a relationship with us, and we are made in that same mold. Now, what do we see in a human being? Friends, the deeper your desire, the less you can put it in words. The deeper your love, the less you can put it in words. You could write for me an essay why you want this car and not that car. You can explain it. You can write a nice composition. Can you make an essay how much you love, how much you love your children? You can't make an essay out of that. That's why love songs has to be in poetry, and it's a love song. It can't be put in words. And the deeper the desire, the less you can put it, because words limit, and words You can't express it. Could you even in a poem, could you say how much you love your children? Really? Or how much you want to live? You can't. So too, the Eibishter's desires, kavayochel, the external level of desire, he could say. An inner level, he could hint. His essential level, can't even put it in words. So how do we know it? Because our neshama is a part of him. And if we reveal that depth of us, we just know this is his deepest desire. And that's where minhagim, customs, come from. Now in simcha, there's three levels of simcha. There's the simcha that is commanded in the Torah, v'samachta b'chagecha sukkos. That's outright, be joyous. Then on sukkos, there's a rabbinic simcha. That's the pouring of the water. It's hinted. They poured the water in the mizbeach, and the Rambam says that was even a greater simcha. Simcha Yisera. But then there is Purim. It's not in the Torah. It came completely from the people, from the sages, from us. And that's Abdullah Yada. That's even a greater. That's even a greater simcha. Now comes the bottom line. What's Purim Katan? Now we're all leading to Purim Katan. And that Purim Katan, which is this truth, is even greater than Purim. Why? Because what's the greatness of this simcha? It's coming from here. It's not contrived from any instruction I've got to do. It's completely coming from the Yid himself. That's the deepest kind of joy. That I'm so connected to you that I know what you want. It's not contrived and set up for me, like a commandment or even a hint. So the minor Purim is more than even regular Purim. Because regular Purim, once the sages made it, they made it a special day. We don't work on Purim. We spend most of the day, there's the Megillah, there's mitzvahs to do. So the simcha you have on a regular Purim, it's induced by the environment. You're dressing up, you drink wine, say happy. Purim Katan, it's completely coming from here. It's not a rabbinic law. And that's why the Ramah doesn't even want to tell you that, because he doesn't want to ruin it. He only hints. He doesn't want it to spell it out outright, because the Simcha of Purim Katan, which is really the deepest Simcha of a Jew, is I am a Yid. I am. And the depth of me knows what the Eibishter wants, and that's where my spontaneous behavior comes from. Where is that? And that's the final statement of Purim Katan, the final statement of the whole code of Jewish law, is Dafka Purim Katan, because it's more than Purim, because even though Purim comes from the people and the sages, and it's not even hinted, but in the end it becomes a kind of a structure. And here it's completely spontaneous. Now, why does it come at the end? Now, final point. You always have to be joyous. Because there's two kinds of joy. There is the simcha, friends, that you have to do while you're doing the mitzvah. While you're doing a mitzvah, you have to be in awe of God, and you have to have a joy. Whistle while you work. What a privilege you're doing the mitzvah. But then there's the simcha that comes at the end, after you've done the mitzvah, this is symbolized by the end of the Shulchan Aruch. What is that? What have I done there? A person has to think, after you put on the tefillin, you did the mitzvah, I was able to fulfill the Eibishter's will. And what's that? To connect to me here in the world. That's a whole different level of a simcha. There's a simcha that you have to have while you're doing it, but then you can't be thinking. You've got to be thinking about the details. Put it on properly. You've got to be busy with the detail and the special intent. The special intent, each mitzvah is different. The tefillin is about intellectual and emotional focus. The talus is about Kabbalah. So whatever, each mitzvah has its own intent and its own, therefore, unique little simcha that you're enjoying and celebrating. But the focus is not simcha per se, it's the actual observance. But once it's done, and the Yid thinks, Gewalt, I'm a Yid, and the Eibishter asked me, and I was able to fulfill it, that is a whole different level of simcha. That comes only at the end of the Shulchan Aruch. And it isn't about the details of the observance. It's about, where does this all come from? It's about, this is really celebrating being Jewish. When you're doing the mitzvah, you're celebrating doing Jewish. That's the focus. I'm doing Yiddish things. I'm doing Torah things. I'm doing holy things. But the end is, I am holy. What do I mean I am holy? I have a neshama, and I've carried out his will and connected and became one with him through the mitzvah that I did in the deepest way. That's a whole different level of simcha. That's not connected to the specifics. And that should be the attitude after any mitzvah I do, which is why it's a final word. Okay, I did it quickly, but I hope that it's a lot of detail because it's all threaded together. So there's the two Tomids, there's the awe that begins, there's the simcha that comes at the end as a result. And when is that simcha? It's dafkan purim cotton, because it's a simcha. It's not induced by anything external. You're told you have to do this. It's really coming from within in the deepest way, even like a custom, and within customs itself, like it's almost not even said it's a minhag. It's hinted. That's the deepest joy that I am Jewish, that this comes out at the end. Dafka, the appreciation of what Yiddishkeit is all about, that it unlocks my neshama and that I connect to God in the deepest way. And it all comes dafka from Purim and dafka in Golos, when it's not commanded, and from within the Jew, as we explained. Yeah, all right, friends. Have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbos.
Shabbos, good Shabbos, beautiful.
Shikoyach, Rabbi. God bless you. All the very best to you all.